Happy Halloween, everyone. Good morning,
Oh,
afternoon, possibly evening, wherever you are, and for the people who are alive or dead. So can we start with Basho, please? Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for this little Halloween CBE seminar on Jodo Shinshu and the supernatural. I think many of you know me, but I think there may be some people who do not, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jerry Kiyoshi, or Kyosei is my Buddhist name, Hirano, or like when I write, it's Reverend J.K. Hirano. Although even after close to 35 years, I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with the title Reverend. But people were mentioning you're not wearing costume. Well, we all wore masks. This is my minister mask for today. But I am the minister for the Salt Lake, Ogden, Honeyville, Utah, and Idaho, Oregon Buddhist temples. And I'm also the director of the Buddhist Churches of America Center for Buddhist Education. So Koichi will be helping me. So slide 2, Koichi. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, and I'm married to Reverend Dr. Carmela. For some reason, my screen switches out. Just a second, please. Okay, slide 2, Koichi. So I'm married to Reverend Dr. Carmela Havliana Hirano, whom some of you may have met earlier this month when she presented with the Women in Buddhism seminar sponsored by CBE and the Seattle Betsveen. I have 2 daughters, Casey, who's 25, and Taylor, who's 21. They both live in Southern California and go to school there, and I miss them very much of this pandemic. I don't get to see them too often. Slide 3. I have 3 dogs, Koge, Musubi, and Miso. As you can tell, they're all named after foods, which I love very much. I'm not a scholar in any sense of the word, but I do enjoy scary ghost stories and tales of the supernatural. And one of the reasons I'm doing this seminar is that after Reverend Landon Yamoka's excellent CB presentation on Jodo Shinshu and Star Wars, and as a plug for upcoming CB events in January, Reverend Landon, Reverend John Turner of OCBC, and Reverend Harry Bridge of Oakland, our current BCA Ministers Association chair, will be doing a seminar on Jodo Shinshu and science fiction. But anyways, after Landon's Star Wars seminar, Reverend Alan Udosaki from Hawaii had mentioned that we should do a seminar on ghosts and the supernatural. So I asked some people who are much more scholarly than I am if they would do a seminar on this subject, and they all politely explained that they were too busy, which was a nice way to say, no, thank you. They weren't interested in such trivial matters. However, I really like the idea, and I love ghost stories, and I love trivial matters. And especially because we had a cancellation of a lecture for this day and date, Halloween, I thought it would be fun. I love, as I said, telling ghost stories and hearing ghost stories from others. Today, I'd like to begin my talk about some of the basics of what I think about the supernatural. And then I want us to tell each other some fun ghost stories. I know Dharma friends from Hawaii, like Reverend Urasaki, must have some Hawaiian obake tales, or what did the Hawaiians say? To raise chicken skin. And I know Reverend Landon Yamoka has some stories. But today's seminar is all about fun and not a scholarly presentation. Jodo Shinshu doctrinally really suggests that tales about superstitions and ghosts are a waste of time in our lives, should focus on the truly important matter of Shinjin, true and real life. But it's more important to focus on our life right now more than what will happen after we die. In fact, I'd probably say Renyo would probably have really disliked this seminar, but here we go. Renyo died over 500 years ago, and if he wants me to stop, his ghost can stop me. But those who know me know that honesty and truthfulness are probably one of the most number one traits for me. I know, in fact, that I'm too honest and too blunt. As Carmela has often told me, be a little nicer. But that's just who I am. More than any other part of my personal character, I've always tried to live up to this. So I will confess the reason I've studied about and thought quite a bit about the supernatural is because when I was growing up, I was a scaredy cat. Whereas my father would say, quit being such a nakimiso. So slide 4. For those of you who don't know what a nakimiso is, it's a Japanese word for a crybaby. The kanji is, as I have there, naku, which is to cry or moan or weep. Miso is the taste, and the third is boisterous or loud. So as my younger sister she still tells me to this day, Jerry, you're such a scaredy cat and a crybaby. But I don't think I'm a nakimiso now. However, I could tell you my transformation from nakimiso to an interested observer of supernatural things begin in about 1973 when the movie The Exorcist came out. Slide 5. How many of you saw this movie and did it scare you? When I saw this movie, I had many friends that were really frightened of this movie. One of my very close friends, who's a pretty tough guy, said he couldn't sleep because of this movie. And as I confessed, I'm a scaredy cat, but I thought this movie was kind of funny. So I thought, why am I not afraid? I know I'm a scaredy cat, crybaby, but the movie didn't bother me at all. So I know this friend of mine I'm talking about is not watching this talk, so I can tell you what happened. Slide 6. I asked my friend what was so scary about this movie, and he said, the devil. Plus, when we saw this movie, when the exorcist first walks into the girl's house, Linda Blair's house, I forgot her name. If you remember, the ghost or the girl screams, Marin, in this really loud voice. That was the name of the priest, the exorcist. She screams, Marin. And so when this devil demon was calling out the priest's name, my friend, this tough guy who got so scared, his name is Baron. He thought she was screaming at him. So he almost fell out of his seat at the movie theater we were at. So although Baron and I are and are still best friends, he was raised a Christian. His family went to the Japanese Church of Christ across the street from our temple. This was the clue as to why I began to not be afraid of ghosts or other types of boogeymen. I don't believe in the devil of the Bible, like my friend did. In fact, according to basic Christian theology, since I'm not Christian, I'm going to hell anyway. I'm on the other side, the devil's side, so to speak. So in basic Christian theology, you are either on one side, the devil's side, or the other. So as a result of this understanding, I began to look into scary things and why I was such a scaredy cat when I was growing up. So I began to try to get a better grip on these scary things. This is in 1973. I was about 16 years old. And I realized about this time that when you're afraid of something, you have to really face your fears. For example, in 1973 was the year I went to my first WYBL conference in Fresno, California. Maybe some of you were at that conference. Being from Salt Lake City, Utah, and most of the girls who are in my YBR temple felt more like cousins or relatives. When I went to that WYB, I was like, wow, look at all these girls. But I was just as afraid of girls as I was of ghosts. So I knew that if I didn't face my fear, I'd really be missing out on life. So at that conference, I actually asked a girl to dance for the first time. And I began to face my fear of things. And one was the supernatural. So as I said, I now have a wife, two daughters, and 3 female dogs. So I've gotten over my fears of girls. And I'm presenting this seminar on the supernatural. So the combination of all this brings us. So let's begin with this theme music for slide number 7. Sound come out, Koichi? If not, we go. Very good. Thank you, Koichi. There were many sleepless nights for me, especially after I saw this episode, slide 9. You can switch.
There is a 5th dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Next slide, please. That's the talkie Tina that I was talking about. So I don't believe the Twilight Zone or the supernatural, for that matter, is another dimension or a place somewhere far away. It's this world we live in. So then what is the supernatural? I think Rod Serling's words reflect exactly what I believe the supernatural to be. This dimension between light and shadow, between science and superstition, which lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. And this is where we find the supernatural. So if we could look at the word supernatural, slide 12. Keep going. Right there, thanks. The definitions is adjective of relating to or being above or beyond what is natural, unexplained by natural law or phenomena abnormal. A noun, a being, a place, object, occurrence considered as supernatural or of supernatural origin. This is the usual or common meaning of something supernatural. And when we talk about something supernatural, we're usually referring to something beyond our everyday existence, something from another reality, bursting into our own little world. However, in a basic sense, Buddhism in general asks us to live in this present world. The basic question of what is the supernatural is actually related to the biggest problem of all human existence. And it's a major question for us as Buddhists. Maybe it is the question. Do you know what that question is? This question is asked by a caterpillar in one of my favorite books, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, commonly called Alice in Wonderland. The question is slide 13. Who are you? Said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then. What do you mean by that? Said the caterpillar sternly. Explain yourself. I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, said Alice, because I'm not myself, you see. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? So this question of who am I has a relation to our Jodo Shinshu perspective about knowing what the supernatural is. For instance, in Jodo Shinshu, it's an important question you should ask yourself if you haven't. Where is the Pure Land? Slide 14. A, is it here and now, but we don't have the eyes to see it? There's some who may agree with A. This is a view that many Zen and some Pure Land Buddhists have. However, I believe this shows a very egotistical perspective that you could even grasp the immensity of the Pure Land. And I believe this is a problem for Buddhism in the West. For me, this idea is the idea of Buddhism of the brain without the heart. It's a very Western scientific approach that if I can't understand it, it must not be true. Or maybe you take the literal explanation of B. Is the Pure Land in the West? This idea of a Western paradise is in response to the setting sun. It would bring you to another philosophical dead end, when West is actually determined by where you are at any one moment. This idea is a metaphor for after death. To me, C is the only answer, since I cannot grasp even the world I'm in or who I am. I can only trust that the words of Shindan, Renyo, and so many of my teachers have explained to me, basically the Pure Land is beyond my grasp. I can only accept what my teachers say. However, the Pure Land is not supernatural in this otherworldly sense. The Pure Land also is a part of my world. It constantly reflects on this world to show me who and what I am. So it is part of the supernatural world. So for the purpose of today's talk, I'd like to use this definition of the supernatural, which I found in one of the books I've read to research this talk, which is called, next slide, The Supernatural, Why the Unexplained is Real. It was written by Whitley Strieber and Jeffrey Kripal. Jeffrey Kripal is the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University. Whitley Strieber, some of you may know, is an American writer best known for horror novels such as The Wolfen and The Hunger. But probably his most famous book is about alien abduction called Communion. It's actually the beginning for all the jokes you've heard about the alien anal probe. This book, Supernatural, has given me a better sense of what the supernatural is. Slide 16. Whitley Strieber writes, instead of shunning the darkness, we can face straight into it with an open mind. When we do that, the unknown changes. Fearful things become understandable, and the truth is suggested. The enigmatic presence of the human mind winks back from the dark. And then Jeffrey Kripal writes, the supernatural, with this little provocation affected by the tiniest and humblest of moves, a single thumb tap on the laptop's spacebar, we move beyond both the flat land of materialism of scientism, the natural, and the naive literalisms of certain types of religion, supernatural. Within that tiny gap or space, we seek another different kind of answer, or at the very least, another way of asking the questions, one that is deeply material and deeply spiritual at the same time. Slide 17. Thus, what we'll be looking at today is the space between super and natural. And I hope we can look a little bit into what is the space between the supernatural, which is Namami Dabutsu to me. There are some who adamantly say there are no ghosts or the supernatural. It's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo created by charlatans. And I understand that viewpoint quite well. When I was younger, by younger, I mean when I was in my 20s up to when I was in my 50s, that is exactly what I believed. However, the older I get, my views of life are not so black and white. It's like the idea of the Pure Land in Jodo Shinshu. There's some people who think humans can't know everything. They have the naive viewpoint that if they can't know it in this materialistic, scientific manner, the Pure Land is here and now. We just can't see it. I think this is an extremely small-minded view of our existence. As we age, we either become the old people who want to say, I know because I'm old and I've had the experience. As the Mandalorian says in the TV show, this is the way. Or we become the old people who realize, I don't really know anything. The world is so big that I can only see a tiny glimpse into this reality I am born into. Since I am now an old person and realize how little I know, I take refuge in this Namo, into the mysterious light of wisdom and compassion. Fushigi ko, as the Shinran wrote in the second line of Shoshinge. Of course, this is a very simplistic explanation. In the cosmology and the belief of Satan, there are two basic sides, as I've said, the good guys and the bad guys. Slide 18. Good guys, gods and angels. Bad guys, Satans and demons. In this scenario, both God and Satan are very clever beings. They're much smarter than we humans. They're the bosses of their own realm. And although according to Christianity, I guess God is a bigger boss than Satan. But under these circumstances, as Buddhists, we would fall under Satan, since besides angels and Christians, all of us non-Christians are already fallen, meaning our souls already belong to Satan. Maybe that's why I wasn't so afraid of The Exorcist. The only exception actually in Christian beliefs that I found is in the Christian world as described in the Mormon religion, which is very prominent where I was born and raised and live, Salt Lake City. Because the Mormons at least give us a chance of going to one or two of the heavenly realms. But getting into that is a whole nother discussion, maybe seminar. But take it to say Satan is a smart guy that knows he already has our souls. Souls are the currency of this war between God and Satan. So Satan knows that if we Buddhists get too frightened by ghosts and demons, we might jump over to God's side. As a result, we have Satan, the devil himself, protecting us from his own minions. Because these ghosts and demons, in this hierarchy, Satan is their boss, so they'll listen to what he says. Slide 19. In fact, when my daughters were little, I told them, when they would say, Daddy, there's a ghost, or Daddy, there's a boogeyman, I told them, don't be afraid. The devil himself is protecting you so that you don't have to worry. So I'd have these two little girls here in this picture. Imagine them marching around our house and they'd be afraid. I say, just say Namo Amida Butsu loud enough so both God, the devil, and Buddha can hear you. And so you'll be protected So if like this explanation, I'm sure my Christian friends can poke holes in my argument. However, it worked for them when they were growing up. They weren't really afraid. When I showed them The Exorcist, they thought it was funny too. Which brings us to part 2 of this talk. If this is the case, where do Asian and Buddhist ghost stories come from? Since most of Asia isn't Christian. If they aren't based in the Bible or God and Satan's good and evil. But actually, if you look at the modern Asian stories like the Korean ghost stories or Japanese ghosts, it actually has a little bit of both Western theology and Buddhist. But in general, if we're to look historically at these Asian tales of the supernatural, most are based on the concepts of the various realms of existence, which can be seen in this image, slide 20, of the Wheel of Life. I don't want to get into long discussion of this image. There are all kinds of scenes and what they represent, but that again could be a whole nother seminar. But I do want to just explain a few things. Remember, this is a very simplistic Buddhist view and not really Jodo Shinshu in its belief. This Wheel of Life, this mandala that I have here is actually Tibetan and is explained quite in detail in a lot of Tibetan works, as Tibetan Book of the Dead. However, the Wheel of Life represents our existence. It's like a map. It shows us the possible realms we are born into. And we're reborn over and over and over in this cycle of birth and death. Slide 21. They're the realms of Jigoku, hell, Gaki, hungry ghosts, Chikusho, the animals, Ashira, Tenjin, Ningen. We have the potential of being born into any one of these realms. That's why the moment of death is actually important in some of these Buddhist schools, because it pushes you into the next realm of existence. You just don't know what's going to happen because we're all fueled. All these realms and this rebirth is fueled by our bonno, or in Sanskrit, we call it klesha, slide 22. This bonno is symbolized by the rooster. If you look in the very center of this mandala, the Wheel of Life, you'll see a rooster, which symbolizes greed, a boar or a pig, which symbolizes stupidity, and then snake, anger. These are the keys to most ghosts and demons in Asian stories. The moment of death and where that person's essence is pushed. Buddhist ghosts, however, usually can be categorized into 2 basic types of ghost stories. And they're both based upon slide 23, Gaki. Gaki are usually called hungry ghosts or hungry demons. Most of you who are watching this seminar know about the story of Bon Odori and Buddha's disciple Mokuren, who saw his mother in the realm of hungry ghosts. These Buddhist ghosts are Gaki. They're either called Gaki or actually Jikininki. Jikininki are literally translated as corpse eaters. Probably the most famous Jikininki or Shokujinki is in a story published by Lafcadio Hearn, also known as Koizumi Yakumo, in one of his books called The Corpse Eater. Slide 24. When I was on my recent road trip that I traveled to the 48 contiguous states, for those who may not know, I just got back last night, so I'm a little tired, excuse me. But while I was traveling, I tried to listen and read a bunch of stories by Lafcadio Hearn. And I think Lafcadio Hearn, Koizumi Yakumo, there's many excellent books in English. In fact, there was a book that was written about him from the perspective of his 3 different wives. I must have an affinity for people who have had 3 wives, since I've also been fortunate to have three wives. But now slide 25. Probably more than any other source, Lafcadio Hearn's books provide us an index of the most famous ghost stories and monsters in Japan. I think the number one would be Kaidan, stories and studies of strange things. You know, these stories you could see actually in movie. This has been made into a movie, such as Mimi Nashi Hoichi, or like The Corpse Eater. Like I said, there's many Japanese fairy tales that were taught to Lafcadio Hearn by his Japanese wife, Setsu Koizumi. She would hear these folk tales all through Japan, tell him, and he would reinterpret it. So this is where I think that we would get most of our ghost stories and demon stories from Japan. Even in Japan, Lafcadio Hearn is celebrated as someone who has collected and saved these stories. So Japanese ghosts and demons, they can actually be categorized all into one big group called yokai. Slide 26. Yokai is a very general word for these various ghosts. Number one is obake. Obake are intelligent creatures. They're well known as shapeshifters. They play tricks on humans. And now, as you can see in the slide, even anime has got into yokai. There's a lot of yokai anime. But in these categories, it can be broken down further. So 27. Okay, this one is also anime. You see these lanterns with a little eye on it. They're called tsukumogami. They're ordinary objects that actually animate after they're 100 years old. They have a ghost-like existence and can also shift into human form. Slide 28. Kappa. Actually, kappa I'm pretty aware of, because when I was a little boy and here in Utah, we'd go fishing on these rivers. My mom would tell me, since she's Japanese, she'd go, "Don't get too close to the river, Jerry. The kappa will pull you in." But these are usually found in or near rivers, and they're thought to be based upon what is a Japanese salamander. You can see that kind of in these pictures. Slide 29. Tengu. Most of you have seen images of the Tengu or masks of the Tengu. They're sometimes translated as demons, since they're said to have large or long noses. However, besides their scary side, they're also considered protectors of Japanese mountains and forests. Slide 30. These are kind of creepy. Yamauba. They're usually depicted as monstrous old women. They pretend to be helpless women and trick humans. Actually, the scariest movie I ever saw was called Kuroneko. It's a Japanese movie about these two Yamauba who was a mother and wife of a samurai. And the samurai went off to war. And when he came back home, these ghosts haunted him. So if you have a chance, I actually bought that movie, Kuroneko, and it's still kind of creepy to this day. All right, slide 31. This is kind of a comical ghost, I think, but they're called Rokurokubi. During the day, they have normal human forms, but at night, they change. They have some anime you see where it's beautiful geisha, and then at night, her head stretches out like this picture shows. So in slide 32, yurei, like the word yokai, yurei covers a wide array of yokai. However, from our Western mindset, I would say yurei are ghosts. The picture on your right is a typical yurei. Also, I was going to put it in, but I didn't. Those of you saw that, I think it was The Ring, a Japanese horror, that girl with the black hair hanging down, walking out of the TV set. She would be a typical yurei. But the picture on the left is a very interesting particular type of yurei called kosodate yurei or amesodate yurei. Kosodate means child who is raised by, or ame is a type of Japanese sweet. In fact, in Kyoto, especially in the, I think it's the Higashiyama district of Kyoto, they actually sell little candies that are supposed to represent the type of ame that these ghost women give to their child to raise them. You know, I heard about a very good story on the Kosodate Yurei by, it was, if you want to check it out, Reverend Ken Yamada, who's the editor of the Higashi website. He wrote an article called Shinran and Ghosts. And he's referring to this paper that some of you know him. He was a past IBS exchange student, Reverend Do E Nanjo. He actually figures in one of my stories that I'll share with you. But he's an adjunct lecturer at Musashino University in Tokyo. And he wrote a paper about Shinran and the propagation through the legendary stories, such as this Kosodate Yurei. You know, Reverend Nanjo, in his article, he talks about this Kosodate Yurei in northern Japan. You know, and this story is actually used for centuries by Buddhist priests. It teaches about the kindness of parents, oyakoko, for their children. Also, one of the seminars we're going to do for CBE was on rakugo, Japanese comedic storytelling. It's a specific type of art that comedians use their fans and tell these stories. And this Kosodate Yurei story is a famous rakugo story also. But anyways, this traditional ghost and baby story, let me give you the basic story. It begins with the shopkeeper closing his shop on a dark and rainy night. When he sees a sad, pathetic woman standing outside his shop, he opens the door and she says, "Could I please have one piece of candy?" And he says, "Am I missing something?" No. But anyway, he says, "One candy, please." And she gives him one coin. And she appears again night after night until she's unable to pay anymore. And then she offers her coat for the candy and forces this coat on the shopkeeper so that she can get that candy. Stopping by the shop one day is a merchant who recognizes that coat sitting in the shop. And he tells the shopkeeper, "That coat belongs to a woman I know who just passed away." So the story goes on to describe how they immediately seek the advice of a local priest who tells them, "Don't believe in such superstitions." And together they all visit the graveyard where the woman was buried and discover a baby. Something happened. I could hear a whole bunch of voices. But anyway, this Kosodate Yurei story has been taken up as a story that happened to Shinran. Right, it happens in northern, and supposedly Shinran goes to this village where this Kosodate Yurei is haunting a temple. All right, and Shinran, the priest tells Shinran, "There's this ghost at our temple. Is there anything you could do?" And it was said that Shinran actually goes to the temple on stones. Each stone he writes one character from the larger sutra. And when he completes the writing of the Muryo-jikyo, the ghost is able to be freed and goes to the Pure Land. So still, if you go to, which it's a temple in It's called Muryojuji in northern Japan. On August 16th, every year, they actually bring out this scroll, slide 33. This is the actual scroll. You can see kind of the hondo and the Naijing in the background. This is the actual scroll that's brought out every August 16th, which is Obon, in recognition of this ghost that supposedly Shindan saved by writing the larger sutra. If you want to read more about this, it's a very good paper that was presented at the International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies. It was in Taiwan where Reverend Nanjo presented his paper. So you can see that at the Higashi Honganji website. But you know, Japanese and Shinshu have lots of scary stories. They always have these stories about Honjo no Nana Fushigi. You can find that on the website. I don't want to go into all these Honjo no Nana Fushigi. And when I was a student at Chubutsu many years ago, we actually had a field trip with the school where we went to Echigo no Nana Fushigi. And in this Echigo no Nana Fushigi, I remember I was looking for a nenju that I bought there. But each bead on the nenju was supposedly from this tree that was just a regular tree. And then Denyo went to visit this temple. And then the next spring, after Denyo visited, the seeds on that tree had a little hole in it. And so they said, these seeds are especially made to make nenju from. So you could buy this nenju for 1,000 yen. And so I bought one. But I told my teachers, isn't that stupid for these Buddhist temples to have superstitions like this? And the teacher just kind of said to shut up and don't say anything. But there are all these stories like slide 34. Some of you might know this famous story. Go to slide 34. Onibaba. They made a movie of Onibaba. If you go to Yoshizaki Gobo, one of Renyo's temples, there's a museum that supposedly has the original mask from Onibaba. And these are part of this Nana Fushigi, the 7 mysteries or 7 ghosts that are associated with this particular area of Japan, and they have to do with temples. So in commemoration of this, I want to share with you the 7 ghosts of the BCA temples. So could we go to 35, please? And 36. This first one, maybe some of you who are IBS students have heard of. It's funny, but I kind of laughed about it. I was told by a student that, did you know there's a ghost at IBS? The dorm's IBS. I says, there's no ghost. He goes, no, there really is a ghost. And so the student went on to tell me that there is a ghost in the dorms of IBS that wanders the halls. It's a woman ghost, because a long time ago, before it was an IBS dormitory, or before it was IBS, this was IBS, this picture here, when I was a student. They says before it was IBS, it was a sorority for Berkeley. So there are women who lived there. And one of these women got pregnant. And no one knew because she was a little overweight, and she had the baby. And there's a laundry chute at IBS dorm if you still go there. And she said, and this student wrapped the just born baby in sheets and shoved it down the laundry chute. And the student, and so now this woman's ghost still wanders the hall, and you can hear her crying. And sometimes you could hear the babies cry in the dormitory. And the thing that's so funny about this ghost story is I made the story up. when I was a student at IBS. I was trying to scare this girl who I'd taken over to I said, I'll show you IBS. You want to see it? So I made up this ghost story about how we're walking. Be careful. You better stay close to me or else this ghost could get you, but you might hear her cry or you could hear the baby cry. So I made the whole story up. And this was 30 something years later, this student told me this ghost story about a ghost that haunts IBS, and I made this story up. So I know how these ghost stories go. But the second IBS ghost is also at the dorm, and it has to do with Reverend Nanjo when he was staying at the dormitory as a student. The story is that he would get up early in the morning to go running. And just beyond the doors at IBS, there's a stair that goes up to the rooms. And he was sitting on those stairs, putting on his shoes to go running early in the morning, 6 in the morning, very early, when, as he was putting on his shoes, a little girl came up to him and asked him, "Where are you going?" And Reverend Nanjo just said, "I'm going to go running." And he didn't think anything about it, because some of you know Reverend Diana Thompson. She has a little girl named Serenity. And they were living in the dorms the same time Reverend Nanjo was there. So Reverend Nanjo thought that it was just Serenity that had come out of her apartment to talk to him. So he told Reverend Thompson, "Boy, Serenity sure woke up early this morning." And Diana says, "What are you talking about? Serenity wasn't out." And so that's the second IBS ghost, the ghost of a little girl who Reverend Nanjo saw. The third ghost, slide 37. Some of you know the beautiful temple Emmanji in Sebastopol. That building is a very old looking building because it was actually created for, I'm not sure if it was the Chicago World's Fair, but it was brought and rebuilt at Sebastopol. But once again, when I was an IBS student, we would have what was called the high school summer program. And the IBS students, we would run this program for high school students to teach them a little bit about Buddhism, and then we would do a retreat. And we would do this retreat at Emmanji. And this happened after we had completed the service. I'm not going to tell you what student it was, but we all had tobans, and one of them was to lock up the hondo, because the hondo was separate. And so we'd take the students back to the main temple, and the whoever's toban it was, they're supposed to turn off the lights and lock the hondo and then come back. And this time we're all finished and we're sitting in the kitchen at Emmanji when all of a sudden we hear this pounding on the kitchen door, and we open it, and it's that student whose toban was to open the door. And I go, "What's wrong?" He goes, nothing's wrong. I go, "What do you mean nothing's wrong? You're pale. It's like you've seen a ghost." And then the student says, I didn't see it. I heard a ghost." He goes, at Emmanji, you have to reach, it's kind of strange the way the main altar, you have to reach into the back of the shimidan to turn out the lights in the hondo. And so this student said, just as he reached into the hondo, the shimidan, a man spoke right into his ear and said, "Don't turn off the lights." And so the person turned off the lights and came running over to the kitchen. So that's the third ghost of BC. These are ghost stories that I know. There could be a lot more. So slide 38, please. Most of you have probably heard this ghost story, especially if you have been in Fresno. I actually heard this ghost story at that WYBL conference when I was in 1973. That's the first time I heard about this ghost. But supposedly there's a ghost at the old Fresno Betsy that you see this light in the basement. This is the story I heard. I don't know if it could be true or if it is, but I was told that in the old days of the Issei, a lot of morgues wouldn't take the dead bodies of Japanese. So before the funerals, the bodies were placed at the Betsin in the basement. And there was one older lady who always stayed, like Otsuya is like a wake service, but she would always stay with the bodies through the night. And she would have a light. And they said that her ghost is still at the Betsin. And many people still see a light inside the Betsin at different times. And if you go towards that light, they said that there's a cold, you know, Fresno is hot there. They says all around this light is a chill. Like there's a ghost or a spirit that is encompassing this light. So that's the fourth story. Those who are from the Fresno area, like maybe Ken or Janet, they know about this story also. Then the fifth ghost story, slide 39, Los Angeles Betsin. This I heard from a minister of the LA Betsin. And he said that LA Betsin, when you're studying to be a student or when you're a new minister at LA Betsin, they don't have a place for you to live. They don't rent a place. They make you stay in back of the Naijing. Those of you who've been to LA Betsin, there's rooms in the back of LA Betsin. And so this minister, when he first became a minister, had to sleep there because they didn't have a place for him to stay. And so he said, for those who know LA Betsin, there's a preschool at LA Betsin that Reverend Russell Hamada helped start, still going on. So there's a lot of children in the mornings. But this minister, one morning, early in the morning, he could hear kids running back and forth in front of his room. And he thought, the preschool kids must have left the preschool and are running around in the Naijing or something. Or maybe they're doing something in the gym. So he didn't think about it. And then he woke up, left his room, and he realized it's Saturday morning. And there was nobody else at the Betsin but him. So that's ghost number 4. Slide 39, 40. This is one of my temples, Honeyville Buddhist Temple. And Honeyville Buddhist Temple is way out, kind of in the Inaka. And it was at one time, even when people were released from camp out of Topaz to work in the sugar beets, they would stay there for a while. But before they rebuilt some areas, this area to your left that you could see, that was the old Naijing. And nothing has been touched for a long time. So you see there's an old pool table there. And then there's little chairs for where the Dharma school met. So this particular ghost happened once when we had a retreat at the Honeyville Buddhist Temple. And the advisors and I would sleep in the minister's apartment there. But one of the advisors said, man, that's a creepy room. And he goes, that there's even little toys still in that by those kids' tables. And anyway, we went to sleep. And right before we're going to sleep, this minister's assistant is a big guy. I hear him scream. And I go, Rand, what's wrong? He goes, look what's in my bed. And he opened up his sleeping bag, and that little toy that was up in the classroom was sitting inside his sleeping bag. So he says that it must have been a ghost of one of those kids, right? And so we'll get to ghost number 7. Could actually go into a couple ghosts. Slide 41, Tri-State Buddhist Temple. I don't know how many of you have been to Tri-State Buddhist Temple. It's a big temple. And the picture on the left is what you first see when you walk into the temple. And up on top, you can see those windows, right? And that's an office. But I've been told by ministers, well, one minister in particular, that whenever they walk into the temple, many times when they walk into the temple, they see somebody standing at that window. And there's nobody in the temple, but they see that figure standing there. First couple of times they thought someone had broken the temple, so they run up the stairs to the office, but no one's ever there. And so they told me, this is some ghost. And this was a while ago, but I just heard a recent story, and I don't hope it's bad, but I don't think it's bad. It's kind of a nice story. Someone told me that many of you knew Reverend Fuji, right? And he passed away a couple years ago. And Reverend Fuji has a very distinct, very deep voice. And this particular person told me they were in the temple by themselves again, in the Hondo this time. And over the loudspeaker system, they heard Reverend Fuji say, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, in a loud and clear voice. And this was after they had just learned that Reverend Fuji had passed away in Japan. And so this person told me, this must be a sign that Reverend Fuji has gone to the Pure Land and is fine. So that's my 7 BCA ghost stories. So now slide 42. So if you can, are willing to, as Koichi says, this is all recorded. So I hope that you will be able to share. Well, I guess first Judy wanted, if there's anything that anyone wanted to say or had any questions, anything in particular.
Hi, Sensei. I think there were just some comments in the chat section.
Okay, I can read those later.
Yeah, and so I don't think there was any real question. There was one about some movies, but
oh, I see Landon says the dorms are still haunted.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I thought Reverend Urasaki had a comment or a question there. Where did his go?
I see it.
So his comment was to a movie, but then I'm not sure what movie. You must have mentioned a movie.
I'm sure like all the Hawaiians got Obaka stories. When I went to go speak in Hawaii, I heard more Obaka stories than any place I ever been. So that's why I thought maybe someone from Hawaii wants to share some of their Obaka files.
Yeah, so people can turn on their screens, and then if you have, a story you'd like to share, please unmute yourself. And yes, you could share a story. Oops.
No, I see Melissa just said, did I have any encounters when I was on my past trip? No, but the screen in back of me is actually the cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts, where the witches that were hanged there are buried. And there's a monument in memory to the witches that had died during the witch hangings in the cemetery. So if there's any ghost video, yeah.
Hey, this is Alan.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the shout out. Yes, I know in Hawaii we have lots of ghosts, obake legends, and because we live in a Hawaiian culture, there's also connected with the Hawaiian ghosts and peles and spirits and those things. But I find, I'm not sure it's so much on the mainland, but in Hawaii, local Japanese, or most people, I think, in Hawaii, no matter what ethnic, ethnic community come from, we're superstitious. And even though technically as Jodo Shinshu, we're not supposed to be superstitious, but yet I find that Buddhists are maybe perhaps, or maybe because they're Japanese, are the most suspicious people. Not suspicious, superstitious people, maybe suspicious people as well. So that's my comment. We'll talk a little bit about some of the stories later.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, when I went to Hawaii, it was for Benyo's 500th year memorial. And so I was talking a lot about Renyo in his letters and things, admonish people about superstitions. And I was on the Big Island, and when I went from Hilo over to Kona, every temple I would stop at, they would do the talk story. And I got like 4 copies of the Hawaiian book, Obake Files, because they'd all say, Sensei, that was a really good talk. I don't believe in ghosts, but, and then they would tell me a ghost story of some ghost that they saw. I haven't heard ministers talking about ghosts too, so.
Can I share a story?
Yes.
Well, this is a story about when my mom was in hospice. So we were taking care of her at her house, and then so one night, so anyway, her hospital bed was in the living room, and then so she slept there, and then I went to bed around 10:30 at night, and I was sleeping in like the guest room at her house, and then at around 11 o'clock, a half an hour later, I just woke up, which was unusual for me because I usually, I'm out, I'm sleeping. And so I got up and I thought, well, since I'm up, let me go check on her. So I went to the living room, and then I realized I thought, I just, how you have that feeling. I said, she just passed. And so I started doing, well, I didn't know how to tell really. So I started doing all those things you do in the movies. Like I see, you put your finger under her nose and because I touched her and her body was still warm, but then, I realized, no, she had passed, but she had just passed. And somehow, I think her spirit somehow woke me up. Somehow she, woke me up. And so when I went out there, it was like she had just passed because she was still warm. And I felt her go from warm to cold. And so that's my true story. So I believe in spirits because somehow she woke me up.
I think it's good when it can comfort you,
I have a story. Is it okay to share?
Yes.
Right.
When my son was about 3, we had a routine where we would lay in my bedroom at night with the lights off. We'd have a Kindle on and we'd read a bedtime story every night. And then we turn off the Kindle after the story, and then we would just kind of talk about the day and kind of wind down for bedtime, and then I'd put him to bed. And one night we had finished the story, we turned everything off, we're chatting, and I don't remember the question we were talking about, but then he points to the dark corner in my room and he says, "But what about that man right there?" I'm like, "What man?" And he's like, "Man right there." And I was like, "What man?" And I'm like, "Was there a man in my bedroom?" I started freaking out. And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "The man in the corner." And I'm looking, and it's of course right by my window too. So then I'm thinking, well, there must be a man outside looking in my house. There's nobody out there. And finally, I'm like, "Elliot, what man? I don't see what you're talking about." And my hands are just shaking. I'm like, "I don't know what you mean." He just pats my cheek and he goes, "Mommy, never mind. It's okay." That's my story. I still freak out about that. I'm like, what did he see?
It's better not to see.
Wait, how long ago is that? Have you brought that up recently with him and asked him about it? Because that's kind of.
He's 11 now, and he's said things ever since he was like, you know, as soon as he could talk, like after 1, he's like, there's someone in my room.
Mm.
You know, someone was watching me sleeping and stuff. Like he would say stuff like that. And I'm just like, it's your imagination, you know. He'll have dreams sometimes where he says, you know, I had a dream where that dad died and they took me to I went to the hospital. They took me in the elevator down to the basement and they uncovered him so I could see if it was him and say if it was dad or not. And this was when he was like 2. And like, how do you know that? How do you even know about any of that? We've never shown him. He watches, you know, Disney. So I'm like, oh, it's not that. So it's just, yeah. And he's talked about like in his past life. So he's like, before I came here, my name was Charlie. I played the guitar.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a really interesting kid. A lot of fun. But yeah, I just stuff like that. He's then used to say, like, when I was a grandpa, I would say this to my grandkids. Yeah. I have a whole host of other stories. I lived in, I swear, what was a haunted house, but yeah, I could go on and on.
Monty the monk at IBS always tells us about how in past lives we were this. In fact, he always tells me and Reverend David Matsumoto, because we used to eat a lot meals together, and he goes, you know, we were all brother monks in a past life, all 3 of us. But then you and David must have did something really bad. So you were born as a Jodo Shinshu priest. And that's why I'm still a Sri Lankan monk. So he believes in those quite strongly.
I've got a story to tell, Sensei.
Good. You're from Central. Have you heard about that ghost at Fresno?
Oh, yeah, that's what I talk about too. First of all, I want to say thank you very much, Reverend Hirano. This was very interesting. It's because I'm always, you know, as kids and everything else, we always talk about ghosts and spirits and everything. But this is a true story that happened to me when I was in college. I used to go to the Fresno Betsuin a lot because they have the most updated typewriters and everything like this. And they had, you know, they even had a Xerox machine that could Xerox things, you know, and then so I used to see at the temple at Annex. The bunch of college kids used to live there. So I used to go over there. So at late at night, I would go up to the temple. To the office, and the temple has 3 floors, and the middle floor was the office at. So I'll go by myself, says, you know, and they would say there's ghosts up there. So I didn't say anything about it, but one day it was like 10 o'clock or something like this. So it was late because it was real dark. So I go up there, and you know, I've done this maybe dozens of times, but this one night it was like I felt something, you know. I felt like this is kind of, you know, for some reason my mind was wandering, and so anyway, so I felt like there was someone else up there, like maybe, you know, those other guys are like Craig Sakaguchi and Sam Tsunada would come up there and, you know, would kind of spook me, right? And so I turn around in the hallway, the dark hallway. I didn't see anything there, but I saw, as you probably know, you go upstairs to the Fresno Betsuin, and then down below you go to the basement. I saw a friggin' light down there. I go, oh shoot! And so I just jumped. I just got out of there with the lights on, everything in the office. I just got out of there because I saw a light flickering down there. And that story of the ghosts is I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw a light down there, and was never supposed to be a light. And you pull on that basement down there, it's colder than it's like an ice box there, even though it's 100 degrees. And it was, and so I told, and sure enough, those guys over there were in, you know, in the annex. They were kind of like laughing at me, but I was white as a ghost, you know, literally. And then so they went back up with me, just, you know, all together to shut the lights off in the office. But I just ran out the door. I was that scared, but it was pretty frightening. And I have one other story that it's not a ghost story, but this is a true story. My Jin-san, he lived in LA, and he had a pond that his pride and joy was one pond that had goldfish in, and he built it from scratch in the backyard. And he started with 2 goldfish, and then it multiplied to like beautiful goldfish. And goldfish pond wasn't that big. It was maybe like, you know, 3 by 4. But he just loved it. He cherished it. He almost like named each goldfish. And he died in 1967. no, excuse me, 1964. Anyway, the day he died, all of his goldfish died. Strange. All of his goldfish died. And it's like the strangest thing. And my uncle tried to clean this. Something must have gotten into the goldfish and all the goldfish died. No matter what they plant, no matter how many goldfish they try to get in that pond, they never could live. They all died within a few days. And so he just covered the pond, the little pond that he had, because he said that his grandfather was his father, my grandfather, my Jin-chan, said he doesn't want anybody else to raise anything in this pond. Anyway, that's my story. Sorry.
Did Shar, I believe, am I pronouncing that correct? Shar Kihara, did Shar have a story that wanted to be shared?
Yes, I do. My grandfather had died after he was hospitalized in 1986. He died in 1986. So prior to that, before he died, that night before, I had a dream. I had a dream that my grandmother, who had died in 1960, a little girl, and my aunt, who had just died the year before my grandfather, all were standing by my bed. And I was half asleep, I think, I'm not sure, but they were all calling to me, come with us, come with us. And I was fighting them, and I said, no, it's not my time, not my time. And I sat up in bed and I was covered in sweat. And I went to my mother and I said, Mom, something happened to Grandpa. Grandpa died. And just then the hospital called and said, oh, he had passed. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a story they'd like to share?
I see.
So I can share a couple things.
Oh, and then I see Rumiko has her hand up too. Who spoke just now?
So-
I didn't.
Dan
Dan
Bonas.
Oh, okay, Dan, and then Rumi, and then Reverend Jay. Okay.
Okay, well, my ghost story has an explanation, actually. I bought a house in Salt Lake City in 1989, and the person who had owned it previously had died in the house. And when I first looked at it, I saw that he had a shelf in every room of the house, and he had a radio on those shelves, and that's the industry that I work in. And so I thought, hey, I like this guy. But he was a bad electrician, and he had wired up a room, his kind of workbench in his basement area, in series rather than parallel, so that when the light was on, there wasn't enough power to run the radio. But if you turned the lights off, it was a tube radio, and it took a moment or two to warm up, but then you'd be outside the room and you'd hear the radio come on all by itself. And that was a little freaky, and it took a while to figure out just what was going on. But guy's name was Frank Corey, and I still think he was a fine gentleman, and wish him peace. And but that was scary enough for the moment.
Thank you. Rumi, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes. One evening I was in bed sleeping, and I felt this kind of like tapping on my shoulder. So I woke up and I looked around, and there's nobody around me. And I'm thinking, what was that? I couldn't figure it out. And the next day we went to go visit my dad, and he had passed away in the evening that same night. And after the funeral, my sister-in-law said that she would walk into a room, do something, walk out of the room, turn the light off. And then she'd walk back in, the lights were on again. Then she'd turn it off and walk back out, come back, the lights are on again. And whenever she did the laundry, she'd have a laundry basket full of clean clothes, and a sock would just go flying over her head. Another sock flying over her head. And she says, she swears it's my dad in his spirit that's telling, her he's still there. And one of our cousins from Japan came for the funeral, and my sister and I took him to the airport. And I had one of those Hondas where when you turn the light switch on, the doors that covered the lights would open up like this, and the light would show. Well, my sister and I had just gotten to the car, and we were just about to leave, and we're looking at the sky, and we said, oh, there's our cousin's plane flying over. And the lights on my car just went on and off, on and off. And I thought, we're not even in the car. How is this happening? And then my sister says that all of a sudden, these birds just would perch whenever her children went outside to the backyard to play. They would perch on her gazebo and just watch the kids. And so somebody said, yeah, that was your dad watching. And so I thought, okay, but I still feel as though he's here. Every now and then, I still feel him here.
Thank you.
That's it.
Reverend Jay, did you have a story?
Yes, thank you. First of all, Hirano Sensei, thank you very much for this. It's really interesting. And I know many of those stories that you shared about temples. And I have one more to add to your number 8 temple stories. But first of all, I remember all through my youth, my father telling me ghost stories, and him being pressed down on his chest by something as he's laying down, the fireballs chasing him through the cemetery in his home in Hiroshima. And I never took much, never really believed in that stuff. And I'd hear ghost stories from members, and I never really put much into that. But when I began my association with the Watsonville Buddhist Temple, it was after Reverend Hanayama had passed away. And many of you may know Reverend Hanayama, and he had a very distinct voice, and sometimes it was very loud. And I don't think I've shared this with anybody but my wife, that I was leaving the Naijin area, and between the Naijin and the back room, there's a kindergarten room, and I coming out the door, and I heard Reverend Hanayama's voice distinctly saying, Namu Amida Butsu, Namandas, and everything's okay. And I looked around trying to find where, was somebody here, but nobody was. I was the only one in the temple. And to this day, I don't know, it's not like it's a haunting. It's just that there was his presence there at that moment. I never heard it again after that. So one more story for Hirano Sensei's.
I have one. I have one.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Okay, this is from when I was a child at the Spokane Buddhist Temple. It was something that we've been carrying on, throughout our life. But my father was the minister. He started the temple in Spokane, and one of the stories that we used to hear was that my mom and dad, they woke up one morning and they came downstairs and they said, talking about a funny dream they had that night. And my father shared that this woman was at their bedroom door, and wore the white kimono and kept bowing and bowing. And my mother said, well, that's weird, because I had the same dream, that there was this woman in a white kimono at their bedroom door, bowing and bowing. And I don't recall what, if she said anything, at the time, but then that day they got a telegram that, and I don't know whose auntie it was, but one of the aunties in Japan had died.
Mm.
So somebody had talked about a parent story, and it just triggered that memory of mine that I had forgotten about growing up in Spokane. And the temple was in our house at the time.
Any more stories? Well, I can tell one if no one has. Oh, Landon, go ahead, you first.
No, Judy, I want to hear yours.
Oh, well, it's not really much, but when I got married, I moved to Berkeley, and one of the first houses we rented, early in the morning, I was sleeping, and I felt the presence of a sea captain at the door. So I didn't know if I was asleep or awake or what. Then later we talked to the landlord of this place, and he said, yes, a sea captain had lived at that house. So it's like, oh, you wonder sometimes. So, but it wasn't someone that I was frightened of. It was just this image of a sea captain that came up. So I was like, then I don't know if some of you know you hear stories about how you can just move ghosts out of your house. So my niece says, I guess you burn sage in all the corners of the room, and that's supposed to help cleanse the room. I don't know if anyone else has heard that too. But anyway, Landon?
Thank you, Sensei. This was really cool. And I have many, but I guess maybe just one, but more also maybe following with a question. So the first weird, before I had seen any ghosts at the dorms, at the IBS dorms, I think it was my first semester, and I was studying with one of the Japanese scholars. And he told me, you can't believe in ghosts because you're going to be a Jodo Shinshu priest. I wasn't at the time yet. So I was like, well, okay, like, I don't know this guy, but like, he's obviously a higher level. I should be respectful. I just won't say anything. So we're studying, and we had driven everyone else to school because they were all in the same class. So we were in the dorms by ourselves, and I kept on hearing like stomping upstairs. And I was like, hey, bro, like, we're here by ourselves. The teachers aren't here. Like Bante's not here. Daijaku Sensei's not here. He's like, no, it's just us. And I was like, okay. And he didn't seem bothered. So I just kept studying, and the stomping kind of got more louder and kind of more frequent. So at some point I kind of looked at him and was like, do you not hear this? Like, I know you don't believe in ghosts, but I was like, you're sure we're here by ourselves? And he's like, oh yeah, by ourselves. Like, okay. And then maybe an hour into it, it sounded like someone was dragging a desk down the hall. Like you could hear like the dun, 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 dun. So I looked up and I was like, hey, dude, like, you're sure no one else is here? And he kind of looked up and he's like, yeah, we're supposed to be by ourselves. And I was like, are we under the bedrooms or are we under the hallway because we were studying in the library downstairs? He's like, we're under these people's rooms. And I was like, so you hear this? Like something's going across, but there's walls here. And he was like, I don't know what this is. And I was like, well, I don't know that you believe in ghosts, and that's fine, but I do. So I think I'm going to leave. And he's like, don't leave me by myself. So I was like, well, I will take you with me to the school. We can get in my car, but if I think there's a ghost, I need to leave. And so I think I've seen the ghost that Nanjo Sensei saw. I thought it was maybe one of the other students who was about that height, but I was like, she wasn't wearing a dress earlier, and I thought I saw someone wearing a dress. So I asked her, and she ran out, and I was like, hey, were you just standing here on the stairs? And she was like, no. And I was like, and you weren't wearing a dress? She's like, why would I wear a dress? I'm like, yeah, exactly. So I guess my question is, why are we not supposed to believe in ghosts? Like, I understand we're not supposed to believe in superstition. So what's the connection to the ghosts? Are we making a connection that doesn't necessarily need to be there? Or technically, are we no superstition and no ghosts? Like,
I don't think that it says no ghosts. It's like So what? I mean, if there's I just to let you know you're not crazy. I used to hear that stomping all the time when I was studying in that library. I don't know what it is, but personally, I haven't read anything that says no ghosts, right? But my feeling is, so what? If people say my house is haunted, I go, just tell the ghost, I'm not going to bother you, so just don't bother me. You can stay here too. So that's kind of how I've always dealt with it. You know, I know the superstitions, it's more because superstitions can become a crutch, right? But, you know, ghosts, if there's ghosts, but I've never heard of anyone really gotten hurt by a ghost. So it's more about just don't worry about it. Say Namo Amida Butsu. Okay.
I see someone's hand. Who is this? Hi, from Hawaii, Betsuine. You want to unmute yourself and talk?
I don't have a ghost story to share with you per se, but since we're dealing with the supernatural, I have a question for Reverend Hirano. First of all, thank you, Reverend, for this very interesting presentation. But I don't know if you have heard of a near-death experience, like how people die, you know, in the hospitals and they get revived, and they seem like they describe the same thing, undergoing this peaceful process of, you know, going into a tunnel, seeing lights, seeing the relatives calling to them, come. But, you know, they say, well, it's not my time yet. And then somehow, you know, they get revived and they describe these events in detail. I don't know what's your take on that, sir. Are they describing something that's supernatural or probably
I don't think
something?
it's supernatural. I've had it happen to me. Some of you know I wrote about it, but about 10 years ago, I died in a hospital in Reno. Okay.
Oh,
I didn't know I was dead, but my wife says, since she's a doctor, she looked at the chart and she goes, yeah, it says you're dead. But for me, it was a very nice experience. So it's more like death isn't something to scare you, because because the nurse was saying, hold on, and she's holding my hand. And I could hear the other nurse, because I had this bleed out and they're doing all this stuff to me. I hear the other nurse telling the doctor, we're losing him. And this nurse said, hold on. And they covered my face with the sheet. And I'm thinking in my head, hey, wait a minute, I'm still here. I'm not going to die. But then I thought, you're an idiot, Jerry. How are you going to stop from dying if it's your time to die? And so I kind of started laughing, how even at the last moment, I'm still an idiot, you know, to think that I can't die. But then as soon as I did that, I felt a warm light, not in front of me or anything, but just like a cloud, a warm cloud, just embrace my whole body. And I just got the feeling everything's okay. You know, because my first thought was, I can't die. But then as soon as I was surrounded by that light, it told me everything will be okay. Don't worry about it. And so I just remember thinking, Namo Amida Butsu, everything's okay. But that was just my personal experience with the near, I don't know if you call it near death. It was death, but I'm back.
Yeah. Judy, did you have, Izumo, did you have something? You had your hand up? Your mic is off.
It was just to mention that those old timers may remember Reverend Takemoto, Art Takemoto, and he's the one that first brought this to life to me when my auntie, who had been taken care of in San Diego, passed away, and I drove down there. It was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and as soon as I went into her bedroom, her body was already gone, but while I was in her bedroom, the lights went off on me, and that just scared me. But then Reverend Takemoto told me that that was just her saying goodbye to me and thanking me for taking care of her. Then a week later, I was sleeping on her couch in the living room, facing the wall. And she was there right next to me. And it scared me because I really believed she was there, but I knew the wall was there. And so Reverend Takemoto told me, well, you say it was 6 days ago, but in Japanese, we count the day she died as day one. So it was actually 7 days ago. And he said that was her leaving for good. And so I was like, wow. But that was, he made me believe that, okay, 7 days, yeah, they leave this world. But so thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Kathy Sakamoto, did you have some thing you wanted to mention to us or experience?
Oh, hi. I so we've got a lot, but since people are talking about dying, for that one, my mother-in-law, who is in Hawaii, when she was in the hospital, she had suffered a major stroke, and so our whole family went to Hawaii. We're in San Jose. So 2 of us had to come back, my daughter Sarah and I, because she had to be in Florida. So we came back by ourselves, and we left my other daughter, Eleanor, and then my husband, Reverend Sakamoto, now Rimban Sakamoto. But they stayed there with the rest of the family. So Sarah and I had to get on the plane the next morning. We were in our house in San Jose, and I'm actually in the room that used to be our guest room, and Grandma used to stay here. So we were eating ramen, instant ramen. And then all of a sudden we had this wafting of plumeria. And I looked up and I said, I smell plumeria, but it could be just my imagination. And then Sarah said, no, I smell plumeria too. And so we came over to the room, and there was just filled with the scent of plumeria. And then the phone rang, and we went to the phone and we picked it up, and my husband said, Grandma just passed away, and so we're calling everybody. And so we said, well, we know because she came and said hi and bye. so yeah, that's the I think the only, well, there's more, but then I have too many, and so that's why I was gonna just that one I'll do.
Oh, thank you. And then I think Pat Nagamoto, you have your hand up. Pat?
Hi. I have kind of what some might think is a kind of a spooky real story, and one that's kind of bright. Several years ago, when my 2 sons were very young, they shared a bedroom together, and they kept getting sick, the 2 of them. And then the candles, dripless candles would drip, and it would be like a snake skin curving down over the side. And these were dripless candles, and the flame was black, dark. So I had a medicine man, a Native American from the Pacific Northwest, come in with his auntie and some other people, and they did a house blessing throughout the house. And we all carried candles and stuff, and then they noticed there was a spirit, they said, in the boys' bedroom. And they said it was somebody who was sick for a very long time there. And to keep burning a candle continuously for 3 days and tell the spirit that it was dead, it was no longer its home, and to go to its new home, to, repeatedly tell the spirit very sternly. So I did that. And eventually the dripless candles quit dripping in it's like a snake skin down the side, and the flames became kind of like the bright golden color. So after 3 days, it was clear. And the boys kept getting sick. So that's the first ghost story. And the second one is my aunt in Seattle had died. And so I was up there to help with the funeral. And I was staying in her apartment. And I was wrapping the presents for the people, the boxes of candy for the people who were helping out with her funeral. And I was in a state of gratitude and praying the whole time. And so it was really late, but it was like 2 o'clock in the morning later. But I was in such sorrow that I lit a candle and I kept saying, I was praying that she'd be filled with light and that she'd be surrounded with light, and that my father and the other people who had passed on before her would be there to greet her in her new home. So I was just praying with the light, sending light to her and everything. And then I went to bed. And then the next day at the funeral, my cousin, who I really don't get along with and I have no communication with, got up and he spoke and he said, there's really something strange happened last night at 2:14 in the morning. I woke up after having a dream, seeing Auntie Sono surrounded by light. And I hadn't told anybody about it. So that's kind of nice to think that after they die, they could be surrounded by light. I don't know how this fits in with Buddhism, but that's it.
Mm-hmm. And I see someone else with a hand, but there's no name. It's an iPhone. Who unmute yourself?
That would be me.
Yes, you.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry. I live in a very, very old house, and a lot of things happen, but I just don't pretty much pay mind to it. But one morning I woke up, I felt a presence, and I turned around and I looked, and there were 5 relatives, 3 of mine, 2 of my husband's, and they had all passed away. So I just started moving my arm, trying to wake up my husband, and just looking at these 5 people standing next to me. I said, am I sleeping? Am I dreaming? So I keep on patting my husband and he wouldn't wake up. And my grandfather, which was one of the 5, said to me, I just want you to know I am okay. So I said, well, that's good. I closed my eyes real tight, put the sheet over my head, and then, just fell asleep. The next morning, I called my mother. That same morning, I called my mother and I said, hey, how you doing? And she says, fine. And I tell her what happened. This happens to be her father. And she started crying. And she said, I was this morning very upset thinking about your grandfather and how things ended. And I was crying and saying, I wish I would know if you were okay. So you just gave me the answer. He spoke through you. So that was pretty much my story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It looks like Jesse has his hand up. Jesse?
Yeah, and I'd like to say something too.
Oh, and Paul afterwards. Okay, Jesse, then Paul.
Hi, I'm Jesse, and I work at the Midwest Buddhist Temple in Chicago for the past 10 years, and I'm usually there alone. The question I get asked most of the time is, if I see any ghosts. And of course I say no, but the first thing I tell visitors, and whether they're there for 5 minutes or an hour, I usually tell the first thing I say is, we don't believe in horoscopes or good or bad luck, ghost, superstition. That's, what makes us different, I guess, as Buddhists. But one of the things being there alone at the temple is during the day sometimes we usually have to take tables and chairs out, for otoki after service, coffee and cake. And then we have to put them away. And of course, that makes a lot of noise, tables and chairs, on the floor. And being there alone, a lot of times I can hear tables and chairs being moved, and I'm the only one at the temple. So I guess I have to say, the next time somebody asks if I believe in ghosts, I'm gonna have to say, yes, I can hear them.
Oh, thank you.
At least they're cleaning up.
At least they're cleaning up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul from Spokane Buddhist Temple. And I have, first I want to thank Reverend Hirano for a very interesting talk and discussion. And I just have a brief comment following on your comment, Sensei, about people who are in the process of dying. Often feel very warm and see this light, And I read somewhere, I think it was an article by a neuropsychologist who was speculating on this problem. And his thought was that it is the brain being flooded with like epinephrine and dopamine and other such neurochemicals to ease the last few remaining moments of the person. That was because this phenomenon of seeing the light, it's not, it goes back through history. I was a German major and I read a lot of Goethe, and those were his final words. The light, he said, and he's writing in the 1800s. Then the other comment was, I lived in Victoria, BC for a number of years, where I lived in a house and I had a big garden in back, and I used to grow vegetables. And next door to me was another man, much older than myself. He was a vegetable gardener. So over the years, we got to know one another really well. We'd exchange seeds or help each other with that, how do I get rid of this bug? And that's that kind of thing. Anyway, I learned one day that, and I forgot to mention, there was a fence between us, about waist high, a wooden fence. So I would see him walking back and forth, or he'd call me over to the fence and hand me some asparagus or something, and we'd do that a lot. He had a stroke and died. And in the days that followed that, I had the sense that he was still there. And I'd look up and it would be as if I were seeing him still walking past. And he never said anything to me. And I knew that he had passed, and I didn't think of it at the time that this was his ghost. Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination, but it just felt so strong and a compelling feeling to look up and to see him walking back and forth. And that happened maybe 2 or 3 times, and then gradually just kind of faded. And that's about the only ghost story that I can think of.
Thank you. I think, Tanis, do you have you have a question, a comment?
Yes, I do. I have a few things, but I guess one that has impressed me, I'm trying to put my video on there. One that has impressed me, I guess that I remember really clearly and really well is my husband had died, and about 2 months after that, I was sleeping during the night, and I heard his voice very clearly in my ear, just say my name. And I woke up, and I was having that experience of not breathing. So his voice said my name and woke me up and allowed me to start breathing again. And I still get really emotional when I think of it. But yeah, so I don't know how that happened, but it did. That's all.
Hmm. Thank you. Uh-huh.
You're welcome.
Were there any other stories that people would like to share? Okay. I think, Reverend Hirano, did you see Phyllis's comment in the chat? Wait, your mic is off. Or Phyllis?
I'm writing her right now.
Oh, okay. Or if you want to respond to everyone, you're welcome to too. Yeah.
I just said that the story is in the book Teriyaki Priest, but if she sends me her email, I'll send it to her, the story itself.
Okay. All right. Okay. Is there anyone else? I think, Koichi, do we look like we're...
Yeah, I feel like this is a really great natural stopping point. And we really wanted to thank Reverend Jerry for his stories. And Reverend Jerry, if you told me about Tri-State Denver, I had to spend the night there. So I'm glad you never told me that story ahead of time, because I don't think I would have been able to spend the night if you told me about that before. So with that, maybe we could ask Reverend Jerry to formally close the session with closing gassho. Gassho onegaishimasu.
Thank you, everyone. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.